Onion Cycles podcast is about thought provoking, emotion evoking, action driven, step by step guidance to explore the unique, glorious, and wonderful ocean of your being. Because healing is a multi layered process of getting to know oneself. Become the self empowered empiric researcher by discovering the unique layers of your existence. With your host, Nadine Alma, welcome to the Holistic Healing Hub. Welcome to the Onion Cycles podcast.
The devil tricks the maiden's father into giving her to him in exchange for great wealth. In 3 years, he warns, he will return and claim her. She lives in prayer for those 3 years, and on a day when the devil comes to take her, she draws a wide circle around her with chalk. He cannot touch her, her heart is too pure. The devil tells her father to keep water away from her so she cannot wash. He will claim her the next morning when her hands are dirty. The maiden's tears keep her hands clean, and again the devil cannot claim her. He orders the maiden's father to chop off her hands. Her father hesitates, but the devil says he will take him instead if he doesn't do it. Her father begs her for forgiveness, and in his fear and ignorance, he does it. He cuts off her hands. The maiden cries all night, and in the morning for a third time the devil cannot take her because her tears have purified her soul. The maiden's father wants to take care of her now that he is wealthy and she is maimed. But she realizes that she has to leave. She can't stay in her father's house. She is no longer safe or at home. She begins to wander, and eventually she finds her way into a garden. She rests near a pear tree and meets a king. He's a good, kind king, and he loves her, stumps and all. Out of his love for her, he makes her silver hands. She loves him. They get married, and soon she is pregnant. But then the king is called away to war. And in his absence, the handless maiden gives birth to their son. He is beautiful, and she adores him. A message is sent to the king to tell him the good news. But the devil is back again and intercepts the message and distorts it so that it says that the baby was born misshapen and ill and a changeling. The king is heartbroken to hear about his suffering child, but loves him all the greater. And when he sends a response telling the handless maiden that his love will never waver, again the devil interferes with the truth and changes the king's message to read that he wants the queen and the changeling killed. The king's mother cannot follow through with these orders, so she straps the baby boy onto the handless maiden's back and tells her to run for it. The handless maiden begins wandering again. She makes her way eventually to a forest, and there she meets with an angel who guides her to a cabin with a sign on the door that reads, "Here anyone can live free." The handless maiden raises her beautiful boy there in the wilderness for 7 years, and in one version of the story her hands simply grow back through the grace of her love. In another, her hands grow back when her son falls from her back into a stream and is nearly drowning. When she reaches her stumps into the river to save him, her hands immediately appear. Either way, her silver hands are no longer needed. Love has regrown her reason for being here. Love has healed her body. And it's not a love that comes from her father or her husband, not even her son. It's a love that came from within her, a love that had protected her and guided her all along. Then the king returns from war to find that his message of love had been tampered with, and that the handless maiden, his queen, and his son had to leave the castle for their own safety. He vows to wander the earth until he finds them. An angel leads him to their cabin in the forest, and at first the king doesn't recognize the queen because she's no longer handless. Then she shows him the silver hands he had made her long ago when they first met, and his face lights up with recognition. They return to the castle, restored to each other and never to be parted again. The 7 years spent in the wilderness in the cabin, this is when she becomes whole again. Because as sweet as the silver hands were, they were never going to cut it. Being held in love by the king, being taken care of, was the beginning of something new for her. The birth of her son asked her to leave home again, to go deeper, to not just cover up that horrific trauma with silver, with making do, but to heal all the way through, to no longer carry the scars, the proof of the trauma, around with her wherever she went, to heal to such an extent that her own hands grew back, to reach a love within her that's divine, that upgrades her silver to what's golden and everlasting. To become whole again is to remember that she's undivided. The tale of the Handless Maiden was originally collected by the Brothers Grimm in 1812, but existed for an unknown amount of time before that. It starts with a devil, a demon, a force that seeks to divide the maiden first from her body, then her father's home, and finally from her love, the king. Hello and a warm welcome, my beloved fellow healing onions. We are back again. We are here with story 26, episode 27. From the Being Human series, this is part 3. The 7 powers of wrath. We are here with the power of ignorance, and this was an excerpt from the book Mary Magdalene Revealed by Meggan Watterson. I am indebted to Meggan Watterson for what she brings up in this book, the amount of inner work and the journey to self-love and self-healing is very prominent and written and seen and palpable and felt in every single sentence, every single word even. What I read to you was an excerpt from the book that kicks off this chapter of the third power, which is ignorance. And I firstly struggled a lot with the concept of ignorance. I didn't really know what to think of it or how it applied in my own life. I'm still not sure if it does really to the whole depth of my soul has sunk in yet. If it really has sunk in yet to the depth of my soul. But I get that the overall message of this story of the Handless Maiden, but also the story of the third power of ignorance, is one that has nothing to do with the ignorance that I think a lot of us understand when we hear the word ignorance in a context in our day-to-day reality. I feel like that ignorance in this depiction of the story and the depiction of what Mary Magdalene was referring to was more of a state of unconsciousness, a state of a lack of awareness, if you will, like an unconscious or being unconscious about something. Because sometimes we need to be unconscious because that's where ignorance is sort of like bliss, because we all heard that saying, like, ignorance is bliss. I don't think it should be bliss, because if you are ignorant and you know it and you're aware of it, I think that's where the danger lurks. Because ignorance is bliss. The good thing of it is, yeah, we only can know what we are ready to know. So for a certain amount of time, that ignorance to see something or to be able to perceive something is a bliss, in the sense that we're not yet ready. And if we would be thrown into that pit of realizing that, I don't know, our whole life is a lie or whatever, then that might be overwhelming and counterproductive to actually taking it slow and unraveling layer by layer, as the Onion Cycles podcast has been named after. Layer by layer, and go further and further and go deeper and deeper within. If you're aware of your ignorance and you still continue to be ignorant about it, I feel that's sort of setting you up for failure, and also setting you up for a lot of pain, either caused by you in your environment, or the environment causes the pain for you as a ripple effect. Because if you are ignorant and say in a matter of, I don't know, a football game, right? So if you're like for a team and then that team loses, and you know perfectly well that the world won't end because your team doesn't win, but you're so deeply ingrained and that is so much part of your personality and your life that you actually then start pulling that anger out and letting that anger out and hurt someone else, then that ignorance that you're aware of that the world doesn't end, but you're just deciding to not care that the world doesn't end, and you sort of fall into the trap of forgetting that you have a decision to make, and the healthy decision for you and others would be to deal with your anger in a certain way that doesn't involve hurting others or hurting yourself. So we dove right into the subject of that ignorance, but what I wanted to disclaim while we're at it is that the 7 powers of wrath that we're discussing, they're not suggesting that we all contain each of these elements in equal measure. It's merely like an informative and affirmative list of the powers that govern us, and it is sort of like a roadmap to navigate what it means to be human and to not be so hard on ourselves. So when we take that into consideration, once we acknowledge that we have been ignorant about something, say we have made up a judgment or an opinion about another person's behavior, and then we get to know the background story, or we get to know more about why they choose this option, why they behave that way, why they talk that way to us or to another person, then we get a more full sense of the truth of the picture. And in that way, then the ignorance is sort of lifted, and we can step out of that ignorance and then go into a place of truth and vulnerability, and maybe apologize, or maybe have like the most beautiful conversation ever with a person we judged or deemed to be no good or not good or broken or whatever. So I feel like all that this word ignorance describes is sort of like a fog that covers the landscape, and then once we step out of the fog or go on a hill and see the object, see, once the fog is lifted because we decide to step out of the fog, and we can see clearly, and we can go back to a non-judgmental way of leading our life and living with others, right? Living in community. So ignorance serves as a veil of illusion, and sometimes that is good. But as we are on this journey of being a self-empiric researcher and going with the direction of self-discovery, it's always more, there's always more to experience, there's always more to explore, and always more to learn. And I believe that ignorance is one of the things that can humble us, that can be a compass, basically a compass needle telling us to always go back to realize that no matter how much we study ourselves and no matter how much we grow, there might and may always be a sense of ignorance in how we perceive something, be it because it is a cautionary action, because it is not supposed to be revealed to us yet, but it's sort of like this humbling sword of Damocles that swings above our heads and always reminds us that, in fact, we know nothing. Like, the only thing we know is that we know nothing. And that is a very humbling, grounding, and positive thing, I believe, because in that sentence lies the essence of the self-empiric research, and knowing that no matter how much you dig and no matter how deep you go, there's always a chance that you have misunderstood something, or that you forgot some parameters, or that you had other factors not counted in. So I believe it's a very good thing to be aware that ignorance is not something that is restricted to a certain group of people or that is spotted very easily, and to remind oneself that we ourselves most certainly are the only ones who can ascertain if we are really ignorant about something, and that only happens if we live our lives in awareness, in mindfulness, and really try to take it slow and try to step out of the hustle and bustle of normal working work life balance, as they say, and try to come back to our middle, our balance, our clarity, our curiosity, our inner being, our inner child, our essence, basically, to then evaluate any situation with the question, have I been ignorant about this? Or am I still aligned with whatever decision I made, with whatever um, advice I gave, with how present I was with that one friend I met, or how I reacted to my child having a peak state of energy and me collapsing into overwhelm. Like, I feel like it's a good center point, a good compass needle point to see, all right, was I ignorant, and was it contributing to growth, or was it contrary to growth, right? So in that sense, when we see that ignorance firstly befalls all of us and no one's safe from it, but that it can also be a very positive thing to experience, realizing the own ignorance that we fell into, then the foggy glass through which we perceive the world, and that also distorts our vision and distorts our perception of the world, that that can be lifted by just being present and aware and going into our essence and our middle and our balance, right? Because the consequences are like isolation, existential separation, which leads them to loneliness. We also take refuge in pleasures and possessions to cope, right? So our system of capitalism is perfect because we've been bred to be consumers, and there is really nothing else that we are supposed to do in this system is to consume all the time, be it content online or be it outside in the world with art or with exhibitions or with movies or with other entertainment like the circus or whatever. So ignoring the fact that we might have something to give to the world, but because we've been bred so good and conditioned so well, we sort of almost celebrate ignorance in the form of a focus on art and consumption, right? So we focus on instant gratification to sort of run from the ignorance that something underlying some underlying issue tries to make us see something. So we sort of run away from what causes us pain and what causes us to be vulnerable in order to numb ourselves, that then is shown in stuff like binge eating or being constantly involved in the outside world and never leaning back and taking moments to oneself and center oneself. That also is sort of like a form of ignorance that keeps us safe, but then also separates us from ourselves. So your brain, we've talked about that, your brain always chooses the comfortable known, even if it causes you pain, even if you know you need to stop eating, otherwise you're not healthy, you will go back to your comfort food because your food was the only thing that was there giving you stability and safety or growing up. So that is also an ignorance. You can put that ignorance on the pedestal and look closely at it and then decide if you want to know it or not. And if you want to know it, then you have this journey of possible growth to look at it from every angle and heal from it, and then not be prone so much to binge eating anymore. While I'm saying that, I want to underline the fact that I've been working on my binge eating for consciously for the last 4 years, and I'm still not done with it. So, how long this journey of healing may take can't be said, but what I would suggest, or what I have experienced in my own life, is that it's always more beneficial to go for what scares you, to go for what causes the pain rather than numb it. That doesn't We talked about consistency in our very first podcast episode, if you want to go back to listen to that. But what I was trying to convey in that episode was also that consistency may look different to you than what it is portrayed, for example, online or in the world. Because such a painful way, or such a way of going into the pain, you can't always show up with 100%, because our system is not designed for us to have all the time and all the resources for ourselves, right? There are other things that come up and that need to be addressed, and then there's no time, space, or energy to go for the healing path. And I feel like that's why sometimes this healing path takes longer, and therefore seems to the outside world to not be a quick fix progress, right? What I would say though is, as soon as you're made aware of your ignorance concerning any topic, it's always a good decision to look at why this ignorance was there, and what now is asked of you to look at that this awareness has arisen in you. Because I feel like we've been given all the tools and all what is needed in order for us to heal ourselves and wake up and lead a more aware life, and have a mindful approach towards life. So this might indicate that you have actually grown out of an old version of you, and now you're called to explore a new version of you. And one part that is made graspable, visible, like palpable, is by showing you that you have had a blind spot somewhere, and that is totally all right, and that is totally normal, I would say, even though nobody's talking about it, right? So, after having, so the consequences of being unaware of the ignorance is, as we said, that isolation, that loneliness, then that separation from self, right? Because we are sort of distracting ourselves with outside stuff. And then thirdly, we also have that question of, does spiritual ignorance really get us somewhere? Like, because there's a difference between being ignorant toward a person or have an opinion on something, and then there's a way deeper understanding of ignorance in the sense of spiritual ignorance, like saying that we're only a body, and discarding the fact that physics is constantly coming up with new proofs that we are not actually just a body, and that actually nothing is matter anyway. So coming into that blossoming of realizing the power, someone who is a self-empiric researcher and someone who is focusing on self-growth and self-love and self-development for the sake of ascension, not for the sake of viewing ourselves as being broken or needing someone outside of ourselves to become unbroken, but just the fact, the ignorance towards spirituality, and grasping the fact that if you have or if you practice spiritual ignorance, then that is also something that is a very slow progress to become aware of. Because quite frankly, so much of our education, so much of our current school system education or university education is based upon finding what others told us to know. That there's a syllabus and someone made up that syllabus, and the books that we encounter are decided upon by someone else who thought like this is what we need to know and nothing else. And it is not encouraged to seek out different streams of knowledge or different approaches to the same subject. What is, however, wanted is to learn something by heart, never forget it, and then repeat it and rinse and repeat it for the rest of your life. So our whole upbringing, our whole education is based upon not questioning authority and not questioning one certain point of view to look from it from the other side. So our whole conditioning basically could be called raising to us to be ignorant, right? Because we're not encouraged to look from at a coin from the other side. We are encouraged to look at a coin and then tell what has been engraved in that coin over and over again, and we get grades depending on how good our recollection of that coin is. And all the art forms that explore individuality and that explore different perceptions and different kinds of viewing the world are getting less and less time while growing up. So where's the art, and why is it only 2 hours per week or 1 hour a week? And why is it that the scientific parts of our education are so much more important in our grading system than the free speech or the debate club that we only have in our free time if we want to do it? Like, I feel like there's a whole agenda to raise a lot of very good, controllable, ignorant people. And that's what I'm talking about with spiritual ignorance. Like, once you become aware that our whole system is designed to make us conditioned to be that way, that's a whole other depth of crisis that you can experience, I feel. Because what our school system is feeding is it was designed to create conforming minions, basically, intelligent enough to do the work, but then also not intelligent enough to ask questions about why am I doing this work? What for? Then we also have been pumped with hormones in our food. We have been pumped with medicine. We have been pumped with myths about diets. We have been pumped about fears. There's fears everywhere. The moment you turn up TV or radio, you've been fed with fears, right? To not leave your secure job, not leave your secure house, not lead a life that maybe has a different direction than what is told you to do, not leave the city, the community. Even traveling, I feel like, has been made very difficult these days. Like, getting a passport and traveling to countries that are in, for example, not the European Union or outside of the USA. I feel like there's a lot going on in that system that is trying to tell us to stay put and not think for ourselves. And that is my definition, my personal definition of ignorance, is like stay put, freeze, don't think further, don't think harder, don't think in any direction, and just repeat after us everything is dangerous, and don't live except within the 4 blocks that your life consists of. I feel like that's the message behind modern day ignorance, and I feel like that is also where spiritual ignorance plays into. Because what, like, where is the flowchart about how to regulate your nervous system, right? Where's the kindness class? Where is the navigating disappointment, sadness, anger class? Where is the art of loving class? Where is, I don't know, where's the plant medicine class, for example, or where is the food and spiritual research that gives us a roadmap on knowing that it is perfectly fine to be human and to make mistakes? But then the flip side of that is that you really need to dig deep and heal yourself, because otherwise humanity will go to the craps. So I've been going a little bit on a rant here, because ignorance for me is something you can't really put it on paper. You can't really write a valuable instruction down, because out of those 7 powers that we are discussing, out of this being human series, ignorance is one of the most individual ones, and how it looks and how it feels and how it is worked on and about, I feel like is so personal. And that's probably why I went on this rant, because this tangent shows me how personal it is to me and how much of my own belief systems I put into this episode, which, if it doesn't resonate with you, that's absolutely fine. Please just take with you what resonates with you, what aids you on your journey to self discovery. But that's what I'm talking about, is like this veil of ignorance that is encapsulating all of humanity at the moment, and from which it is so hard to wake up, not just because of the fact that waking up is hard, but also then dealing with the fact that you're such a different person. You're not made for that system anymore. So you don't have a home where you would feel at home with that newfound discovery of freedom and self empiric study and just wanting to grow and heal. But you can't also go back into a system where you see ignorance on a daily basis, but you can't really do anything about it, because there's no time, no space, and no energy to do so, because you need all of that to stay sane, basically. So I apologize for the tangent, and I hope I was able to convey the message of ignorance in a way that resonated with you. And I want to close this podcast by coming back to how we started it, with this very beautiful tale of the handless maiden. Because what the end of this story is talking about is that you will encounter ignorant people like her father was for cutting off her hands to be wealthy. You will discover love that gives you the chance to experience the first steps towards self growth and towards self love and what honesty might look like. But you could also be deprived of that love and then find yourself alone again. And the key to getting closer to yourself is really finding that strength within yourself. It's not about resiliency so much. It's about accepting that we are human and accepting that there is vulnerability, accepting that there is hurt, and not seeing it as something that is bad. Seeing it from that perspective, I feel like in itself is ignorance. Because out of that vulnerability, out of having the courage, out of having the strength to look at our own wounds and not let them fester in the dark, but look at them, and in doing so, realizing what caused them and realizing what you need to do in order to heal them, to not have scars in the end, or to have scars that remember you how strong you actually are through your vulnerability. That then, I feel like, is actually the veil of ignorance being lifted from our soul and being able to apologize to our inner child, to ourselves, to all the others that have suffered through our ignorance, and then make amends, doing something that sparks joy and that sort of underlies that very beautiful essence that we all are, that is kind to ourselves, that promotes self-love, and that celebrates that it's okay to be human, it's okay to be ignorant, it's okay as long as we sort of go into the direction to discovering in which areas we were ignorant.
and then undo that. And with that said, I open my heart wide to you and I take off an imaginary hat to salute you and to bow to you for having the courage and having that inner longing and that inner strength to look deeply at what you are about, what your essence is, what you want to be, what you want your life to look like. It is not the easiest path if we are made to believe that from outside sources that we are choosing the easy path. It is not, and that is why I salute to you and I send you from my heart to yours all the love in the world, all the energy in the world to do your work. And I am very much looking forward to next time. Be well, take care of yourself, be kind to yourself and to others. And I love you very much, my beloved fellow healing onions.